So let's continue down this path of deconstructing the thinking process, exposing thought for the illusion that it is. And the reason this is so exciting is because, well, it's so paradoxical. I mean, on the one hand, thoughts, overthinking in particular, may be the main source of modern human suffering, particularly human beings they've got the survival game down. They're no longer hunting for food. And yet their main problem seems to be overthinking, even though thoughts so often are not on track. Thoughts seem to be a horrible GPS navigator for reality. And that's what I've been talking about with these last couple videos. But today I want to focus on metacomprehension. So metacognition is a much more broad area that looks at thoughts about thinking. Metacomprehension is when we have thoughts about understanding. And so you're reading a passage, and then you start to think about what you were just thinking about. And sometimes you get it, and sometimes you don't. In other words, sometimes you're reading a passage, and you're like, I have no clue. Sometimes you read it, and you're like, I totally understand that. Well, we're not very good at those distinctions. So again, let's start off with a study by PRESSLEY and GHATALA, and it's from the 80s, and simple study. People would read a passage, and they would give a rating of how confident they are that they understood it. And so what they're doing is they're thinking about what they were just thinking about a moment ago, and whether they understood just moments ago what they were reading. And 0 is I have no clue. 100% is I'm 100% certain I get what I was just reading a few moments ago. And when they actually did understand what they were reading, their confidence was 72%. When they had no clue of what they were reading, that only dropped by 7 points. It actually dropped to 65%. And so there's a very small difference between knowing that we know something and not knowing that we don't know it. And so it's a scary, subtle difference, because for students, it's very important for them to read something and then know whether or not they comprehend it. But this also comes up in all kinds of different ways in life. And I would do this as a demonstration in class, and it ended up really embarrassing people, so I stopped doing it and then just started to talk about it like I will now. So I found one of the most incomprehensible paragraphs in Being and Nothingness by Jean-Paul Sartre, and I still to this day, I've read this thing hundreds of times. I'm not sure if it has any meaning to it. It looks like random words to me. So I thought it'd be a good choice. Assuming, again, most of the students haven't read Being and Nothingness, particularly the most difficult section. And so I'd put it on the overhead, and I'd give them 5 minutes to read it. And then I would ask, okay, who understood pretty well what they just read? And invariably, at least 3 or 4 hands would shoot up in the air. And I would call on one and say, well, okay, explain it to me. What is it that you just read? And they would fumble around for a few minutes, and this is where it got embarrassing, and finally admit complete defeat. And they'd be like, I guess I don't have any clue. And so when they assessed what it was that they were thinking a few minutes ago with the thinking mind was fairly clueless. And this could be one reason why we see so many recent publications, these hoax papers. And so researchers would purposely make these meaningless, incomprehensible articles, and then they would submit them to actual academic journals and get this amazingly high acceptance rating. And that could be because, again, even academics may not be immune from the low accuracy of meta-comprehension, or to say how often we make mistakes when we start thinking about what we were just thinking. And there's a way out of this, and this is the good news. I want to leave on something positive, and it comes back to bringing it into the real world rather than thinking about it. So when you read something and then you just think about what you were just thinking, we're terrible. But if you read something and then put it to the test, like I did with my students, you get accurate feedback of whether or not you understand it. And this is why there's that old saying, you don't know something until you've taught it. And so one of the things we can do to improve metacomprehension is, after reading something, pretend you're lecturing it to someone, which is to say, put it to a test in the real world to see if you understand it. Because if you leave it to thoughts alone, like I've been saying in so many of these other videos, thoughts are a really poor navigator, GPS system to guide us through the real world.